In our increasingly electrified society, that's where a resilient grid matters most. ITC Great Plains is ensuring the greater grid can meet our energy needs now and long into the future. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.
And good evening and welcome and the return of the Kansas Legislature here on Smoky Hills Public Television. I am your host this season, Becky Kiser. So glad that you can be back with us. We were off for about 3 weeks, so we're glad to be back here. And we also want to extend an invitation and a thank you to the gentlemen who are with us this evening. But first of all, we want to remind you that this is being brought to you courtesy of the Fort Hays State University Docking Policy Fellow Institute, and also, of course, sponsored by ITC Great Plains. Again, I'm Becky Kiser. I'm from Hays. I work for Eagle Communications, Hays Post, in the news business. And speaking of the news business, I want to go to Clarke Sanders, Representative Clarke Sanders, as one of our visitors who will be talking this evening about what's been going on in the legislature. And Clarke has been, for those of you who don't know, is from Salina and was in the radio business for a long time.
And still am part-time.
Oh, you are still doing it part-time.
Yes,
excellent, excellent. So we'll find out a little bit more about how that transition has gone. And then also joining us today is Representative Ken Rahjes, who is from the 110th District in Agra. Ken, let's go back to you since you talked about, I'm sorry, I'm looking at Clarke.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about.
Well, I'm better looking than you.
Well, of course. So that's, I was immediately turning towards you. I'm just excited for the opportunity to meet you in person. And I've been thinking about this. It's kind of interesting that you've gone from radio and communicating with people, being on in the Salina area for so long, and as you said, still part-time. And in many ways, you are still communicating with people and finding out their opinions and what can happen with that. So if you would, Clarke, and again, you're relatively new to the state legislature. Tell us a little bit about what you actually do.
Okay, so just a quick history. I hold the seat in the 69th District, which is basically the west half of Salina. And I ran for this seat originally in 1992. And I won the primary and lost in the general election. And then I ran again in 2000 for the state senate and finished second in a three-way primary. And basically I like to believe that God was telling me it wasn't time in 92 and in 2000 with, you know, young children at home at that time. And then I semi-retired from radio from KSAL April of 2020. And I found out after about a month and a half of laying around watching YouTube videos, there's got to be more to life than this. And so I kind of rekindled my interest in running for elective office. Now, I had a political talk show for over 20 years on KSAL called Friendly Fire, and with a variety of hosts over the years, debated the issues of the day. So I followed, you know, what was going on in politics pretty closely on the radio. But I got to tell you, it's a whole different deal once you get up to Topeka. I remember when I was on the radio, I used to think several times, what are they doing? Why are they doing that? And now I think that about half as often as I used to think, what are we doing? Why are we doing that? But so I was kind of a nerdy kid in junior high and high school in the sense that I really enjoyed watching the national political conventions. Republican or Democrat, didn't care. And back then they covered them wall to wall, you know, from the opening gavel to the closing gavel. And it was summer always. I'd stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning in 1968, 1972 watching those conventions. So I've been a fan of politics for a long, long time.
So tell us, what committees are you on and what are you working on? We'll get into more details about specific issues, but tell us about your committees.
I'm on the local government committee, and that's kind of an interesting committee, although we don't meet a whole lot. And then I'm on the education committee, And, you know, in the day, the Education Committee was one of the sexy committees to be on, and then I came along and that kind of killed that. But there's now a committee since the Gannon decision, the K through 12 Budget Committee is really where a lot of the action goes. But the big committee I'm on is the Taxation Committee, so I'm on the House Tax Committee.
That's always a hot topic, always
Yeah.
something going on there.
Yep, oh yeah.
Well, let's move to Ken Rahjes. And Ken, you and I have known each other over the years. You've been doing this for a while from Agra. Remind us what committees you're on this session.
Okay, I'm the chair of the Agriculture Committee. I also sit on Appropriations and Higher Ed Budget Committee.
And is there anything specific that is going on in any of those committees that people may not realize? I think about the Ag Committee because
Right.
you are experienced in that industry yourself
right,
personally.
Right. Well, you know, the committees have now wrapped up except appropriations and some of those committees that can do some exempt bills. In fact, we go on the floor Monday ready to wrap up with first adjournment on April 1st. Yes, it is April Fool's Day. Draw your own conclusion if you want. But you know, last year in agriculture, we didn't do a whole lot because of the uncertainty of COVID.
Sure.
And so we did a lot of cleanup things, some good things. Cotton is an industry that continues to grow in Kansas. There were some things we needed to take care of there. More people are wanting to know where their food comes from and buy food, maybe from on the farm. Especially, and one of the things we needed to work on was raw milk. Folks want to buy raw milk. We're not saying you can't, but we're saying want to make sure that if there needs to be any rules or regs, that those were taken care of. We worked on that. A lot of things of transporting livestock. You know, we had some informational hearings too, Becky. I think one of the things that sometimes we focus on, especially in our area, is the simple of production of the major crops. We took a little dive into the food system and finding that there are food deserts in this part of the world, and western Kansas and even in some of our metro areas. And so is there a role for the Agriculture Committee and the Kansas Legislature to either support that or try without necessarily reinventing the wheel or creating new programs? But it was kind of an idea, okay, here's what's working, and we did a lot of focus on what we learned from COVID in moving forward. And another bill that we worked on and got out of the House Ag Committee was dealing with cell-cultured meat.
What is it?
Cell-cultured.
Cell-cultured.
Some
Right.
call it fake meat.
Right.
Others are,
That I've heard.
Right. And you know, and I might be the one to call that, but again, trying to be as encompassing as that. But so, and there's a lot of discussion, and we've been working on that now for several years. And some of our primary companies that own a lot of the harvesting facilities are into that business as well, that cultured or using plant-based type things. And so, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, it's yet to go above the line, but it's something I think that also it would send a nice statement that we as the legislature also support you know, a very strong industry, and that is animal agriculture here in the state of Kansas.
Absolutely. Well, we want to remind you that you have the option this evening, and we certainly hope you take advantage of it, to ask your questions, make comments to our legislators this evening. That phone number that you can call, toll free, 1-800-337-4788. And I understand we do have our first caller on the line right now, Rick from Salina. Rick, your question this evening of the legislators. Rick, do we have you on the phone tonight?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. And you have a question?
Yes, it's for Clarke. I would like the legislation to repeal the state food tax.
You're kind of breaking up, Rick. And yes, I do know you. Have known you for years.
And
Is the legislation
Sales tax on food, I think is what he was asking.
is the legislature repeal the state food tax?
Rick, you are breaking up. You might want to try and call back, see if we can get a clearer line, but it sounds like that you're asking about the status of there's been some proposals, discussion about removing or reducing the sales tax on food in Kansas. Clarke,
Sure.
where do we stand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that actually was voted out of the tax committee this week, and there were 4 different proposals, and the proposal that passed was an immediate, I mean, as soon as it's published, well, as soon as it passes the Senate and the governor signs it, to reduce the state's portion of the food sales tax from 6.5% to 3.5%. Then, depending on certain criteria, the sales tax on food would go down 1.2% every year for the next 3 years until it basically is down to 0. So this approach, the majority of the committee thought was a better way to go. So it steps it down, and it gives us a chance to make sure that we're flush with the funds to be able to afford this. Obviously, this year we are. We've got $2.9 billion to play with. So this year isn't going to be a problem. 2023 isn't going to be a problem. But in some of the years beyond that, we weren't sure. And so what passed was to reduce it from 6.5 to 3.5 immediately. Now, the main thing that people need to keep in mind is this only affects the sales tax portion assessed by the state. So any local sales taxes would still be in place. So even if we went from 6.5 to 0, which this would eventually do, but even if we did that immediately, it's not like you would go in to a store and buy something for $1 and expect to just pay $1 for it, because in most places there would be a local tax of 3.5%, something like that. So that item that, let's say it was 3.5 locally, so that item now that is now costing you $1.10, if it went to 0, would cost you $1.03 or 4 under what is being voted on the House floor probably this coming week, would take that theoretical $1.10 down to $1.06 or $1.07. And then a year from now, another 1.2% would come off, and then another 1.2 until it was eventually 0.
So I imagine to most people that sounds great, less tax. Most people favor that, but there can be maybe unintended consequences. I know there's been some question about whether this would apply to foodstuffs, perhaps in a restaurant, at a taco truck, something like that.
And the bill certainly addresses that. And prepared foods is another issue, and the bill addresses all that. And so yeah, I think that you'll find that it's very equitable across the board. But there are going to be people, including the governor, who want 0 now. And we don't think that's the responsible way to go. We think a stair-step down approach, the term that's been bandied about is glide path to 0.
Ah, there you go. So what is your expectation? Is this going to get passed?
Oh, I think it'll pass the House fairly easily. Ken would be a better one to ask his sense of the Senate. I don't know. I mean, I would guess it would, but then they surprise me from time to time.
Ken, do you have a feel for that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it'll pass the House. I think there's still some questions. There were so many different proposals out there. And one of the things, if this passes and it would get signed by the governor or if she vetoed it would get overridden, there still is that caveat where we have to have, what is it, 100 million? Is that right? You have to have so much saved in the rainy day.
Stabilization
fund. The stabilization fund. And so that will be a challenge, I believe, starting in 24. So, and I think that's where my concern in all this is when it was proposed early before the session even. I think people listened and said, oh, 0 sales tax on food, because we're not that far away from the Nebraska border where it's 0. And other places, and Missouri's even lower, and so I think that's part of it. But I'm just afraid that people assume that exactly what the Representative Sanders said. You go in somewhere, and if it's $1, it should be $1. but so many of these local folks, I'm thinking of St. John and a lot of communities that have a local sales tax that are paying either for some sort of economic development project or a swimming pool. A lot of communities are doing that, and so that will still be there. So I think it will take an education process. I think the Senate has something along the line. What will happen probably, Becky, is we will have probably a fairly decent sized tax bill. That's still being negotiated as we get with both the House and Senate and what will and won't survive. One of the things I would have liked to have seen is some sort of tax reduction. I don't know if that's going to happen, just because of, general overall, whether that would be a sales tax reduction more than just this, because we're dealing with this inflation situation that we really haven't addressed as strongly maybe as what we should have.
And that just really kind of cropped up. I mean, within the last couple months, I would say, that it's become, everybody's noticing it in their pocketbooks at this point.
It is, and it's definitely something we've looked at the legislature.
Before we leave the food tax reduction, I want to point out that in 2019, both the House and the Senate passed, I think to zero, I believe, and the governor vetoed it. And now all of a sudden, here we are in 2022, and it's an election year, and the governor has been pounding the drum for axe the tax, axe the tax. I'm sure she wants zero. She's not going to get zero. She might get what we've passed out of the House Taxation Committee, and then she'll have an interesting decision to make, because she's been pounding the drum for zero, and I don't think the legislature is going to send her zero, and so then she'll have to either decide 3% is better than nothing, or she'll veto it.
We'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens.
Again, a reminder that you can make your phone call to our representatives. Clarke Sanders from Salina and Ken Rahjes from Agra are with us this evening. That toll-free number, 1-800-337-4788. And I understand we have Rick back from Salina, hopefully with a better, clearer line this time. Rick, again, your comment and question?
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask Clarke for the legislature is good on the time change that to go to ready. I mean, we don't need it like outdated, and not only that, doctors doesn't help.
Well, I'm sorry, Rick, I can't
That doesn't sound any clearer, unfortunately.
understand about every 10th word. Sorry.
Apologize for that. We'll try to get that fixed so that we can understand you. I did want to ask you, Ken, you talked about you think perhaps in 24 the stabilization fund may not be so stable, the rainy day fund. As we said, right now we're kind of flush with cash. Questions, how did that happen? Because it seems like for quite a while Kansas has been, really tightening its belt and has not had that advantage. Now it seems like all of a sudden we do, and we're looking at putting some of that away, but you're saying...
There's a couple things. Okay, last year the legislature, we kind of tried to fill in the gap of some of our, maybe it was 2 years ago, where we tried to fill in some of those maybe sales tax we were missing online. I think and so some of the big ones we were collecting sales tax, and then we kind of some of those maybe subcontractors with one of the big ones like Amazon. We kind of cleaned some of that up to collect it, and again, not to punish anybody, but just to try to make it fair with our Main Street businesses. And I think those numbers came in much stronger than we were expecting. Obviously, during COVID, a lot of folks bought a lot of things online, and so those taxes were collected, and then as people continue to go out, sales tax continued to be collected. I think we would even have more sales tax revenue if we could get vehicles. People could trade cars or do some of those other big ticket items, some household things. They're simply physically not there. And the other thing, obviously, is there's been so much money come in for the federal government, and it makes it. Then you have to make some of those decisions. Some of those stimulus funds that were given back to the state, they've gone through a process, and maybe we had upwards of $700 million, but we had almost $4 billion worth of proposals for people to use that money. One-time money, and as we look at the budget, Becky, we passed out our budget last night in the House, and let's see, the numbers came in, so at the end of the 2023 budget, right now the way the House position sits, we will have $1.7 billion as leftover or rainy day fund, or to keep within that, what we need to keep a balanced budget. The reason why I say 24 is you look at the cyclical nature of the economy, and we see where we are right now with high fuel prices, high input costs for agriculture. While we do have high commodity prices, we have those expenses for everyday folks continues to get higher. And so will that, where are we going to be with inflation? Where are we going to be with folks working? Because some of the supports also come from the federal government for those that are still seeking employment will probably stop. And we have the situation with Russia, Ukraine. What impacts does that? May not have a direct impact on all of us, but it will have an impact on people's confidence, how they will participate in the economy. And so I think we have to be very cautious and make wise investments. It goes back to maybe when I first started in the legislature, when we were having to do some very creative things to keep things going. And maybe that's even makes us better legislators when you don't have a big surplus to try to just give something out to everybody, but really hone in and make those decisions. And I think that's what you're going to find is, as this one-time money goes, we have to be very careful. And I believe we have, and we'll continue through this budget process, that we don't create a whole lot of new programs that have to continue to be funded, but try to shore up maybe some of these, or to do some of these to maybe pay off some of our debts, refinance some of our bonding, and so kind of shore up some of those long-term debts, capers and other things.
And I'm a big advocate, just like Ken, of not creating ongoing programs. Yeah, we can pay for them now. We can pay for them next year. But what about beyond 2023? And a major issue in this state is broadband in western Kansas. I mean, we are woefully lacking in reliable broadband in western Kansas. Now, you do whatever you're going to do, whether that's hang line, whether that's dig a trench and lay line in the ground, or whether that's put another satellite up in the air, whatever you're going to do, that is a one-time investment that I think is going to pay huge dividends. Once you get broadband up and going, it's not going to take much to maintain it. And one thing that every person in Topeka agrees with the possible exception of some Johnson and Wyandotte County legislators, and they probably do too, is we need more people coming to this state. We, after the 2020 census, was able to hold on to 4 federal state representatives. We're that close to being down to 3. And if things don't change between now and 2030, we are going to lose a United States representative. And I think we can ill afford that. So we need to get people moving into this state. And obviously, you see some people more than willing to get away from the rat race of the big cities that they've been in. I mean, people are fleeing California left and right. Why don't they come here? Why don't they come out to the high plains and where life is good and the air is clean and schools are great and crime is low? They can't do it, a lot of them, without reliable internet. And so I think that needs to be a priority.
Do we have any plans? I'm thinking that
there's always things in the works. One of the things we heard in tax earlier this year was a proposal that would there was some tax incentives to do some internet, but only about a third of it was going to go to western Kansas. another third of it was going to go to some smaller urban areas, and about a third of it was going to go to major urban areas. And it's not hard to figure out why the companies want to do this. I mean, they can reach a lot more customers by doing a lot less work. You come out in our part of the country, and it's a lot more work, and there are a lot fewer people here to take advantage of it, or to help foot the bill for it. So it's a problem.
We have another caller on the line, and let's go. We may bring this discussion up because I have another question for you on the broadband. But again, a reminder, the phone number you can call toll free, 1-800-337-4788. And from Mound Ridge, we have Max on the line now. Max, your comment or question?
I'd like to have more explanation on cars brought out of state, brought into state for use.
Can you repeat that, Max? We only got part of what you said.
Tax on cars purchased out of Kansas and brought in Kansas for use. There was an indication there that there was no tax on it.
I think he's talking about cars purchased out of state and brought in state, and what the tax implications of that is. Well, obviously, you're going to pay sales tax at the point of purchase. So if you purchase a car in Oklahoma or Missouri or wherever, that's the sales tax you're going to pay. Now, your property tax will be paid in Kansas, of course. And so, Max, what do you think the problem is? I think Max is gone.
Oh, he is off the line. Is that fairly common that purchases are made of
Well,
vehicles
sure.
outside
I mean,
the
if
state?
you can get a better deal somewhere else, you're going to do it. And in the Kansas-Missouri border, stuff like that happens all the time. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it's Kansas that's coming up on the short end of the stick.
We have another caller with us this evening. Again, that toll-free number, 1-800-337-4788. From Victoria is Nick this evening. Nick, your comment or question of the legislators? Nick, did you have a question of the... Oh, nope, he's gone. Hopefully he'll call right back. I want to get back to broadband because that is something that is exactly what you said, Clarke, about the importance of having it in the rural areas. It's, as I understand, expensive, more expensive obviously, to do that in the rural areas, but there are different groups, and I know that Rahjes and the surrounding area is working to promote that you can leave the rat race or come back to the home that you grew up in after being in the rat race and bring your family and do things with that rural broadband provider that allow you to do the work from home, and they're really touting that. But as you said, it takes the investment of the providers. And I was trying to remember, it seems like there was at one time during our pandemic, Ken, that there were some offerings of broadband because so many kids had to stay home and they were going to online school, and some people don't have that in their homes.
Well, and through some of this, whatever the Build Back Better or some of those ideas, there was money earmarked, and I don't remember exactly how many dollars that Kansas is going to get, but as we go, we have to give a shout out to the company that you work for, who has done a great job in many places, and especially Northwest Kansas and others. I represent Nextech, Lenora, and very proud of them as well. And I'm one that lives out in the country, and we're, they're trying to build that out there and realizing that it is going to be more expensive. But I have a second location in a town that has faster internet available, and so I have that extra cost as well. So hopefully that will get built out. I think, even 20 years ago we talked about some of the things Representative Sanders talked about people getting out here with the clean areas and it's safe and everything. And I always told, that's why people moved, but now they want to do all that, but they want to take a selfie and send it around the world in a nanosecond. And if not, you'll find a place to do that. And so with education and with other things, it's going to happen. But what I've, continued to talk with our federal delegation, it's kind of the next version of the Rural Electrification Act.
Yes.
To where that's what it's going to need. And that they may have to be a bit of a subsidy. And sometimes we do get those discussions with our urban legislative friends, and I always tell them, a strong Western Kansas means a strong Kansas. You've got to have, we are all, really the same. It's just a matter of where we choose to live. But we have a lot of great options here in Western Kansas, and so sometimes it does get a bit frustrating that, that sometimes people think that, the state is divided in two, and that two is split in Wanamaker Road in Topeka. And so we always have to remind them that, and get them to come out and pull off the interstate if they go out to Colorado on vacation. I think once they do, then they have an appreciation. But that's the things I do. I think Representative Sanders, talks with urban legislators. But what's great is when folks come to Topeka, and a urban legislator can talk to a rural citizen, one of our constituents. And then maybe Clarke, always lives in Salina. To me, that's a huge town. But to have that connection, I always try to do that. Try to make a connection with an urban legislator. Then I leave. Let that urban legislator and that constituent talk, because then they can make that. And then maybe when we get to bills that are important to all of us, but may have some benefit to Western or rural Kansas, that urban legislator would say, "Oh, that's right. I remember I met one of your constituents, and yes, I understand why it's important that we do have a strong rural Kansas."
I want to kind of dovetail off something Ken just said. What is the definition of Western Kansas? I didn't realize in Salina I was in Western Kansas until I got elected to go to Topeka. And just like Representative Rahjes said, there are people who honestly believe once you get west of Topeka, you're in Western Kansas. And they'll say to me, "Well, you're from Western Kansas." And I'll say, "No, I'm from North Central Kansas." I said, "You can see Western Kansas from where I am." Basically, my definition of Western Kansas is anything west of I-135, 81 highway, is if you're west of that, you're in Western Kansas. So we're right on the edge of Western Kansas in Salina, but we're not in Western Kansas as far as I'm concerned. And one other thing that's kind of interesting, I was shown a map a couple of weeks ago, and it was color-coded of where there's a big problem with broadband access and where it's solid, it's flush, and then varying colors showing how good a situation you were in. Well, as you might imagine, southwest Kansas and northwest Kansas were the orange color, which was needs a lot of work. I forget what the terminology was. But there were little pockets in Sedgwick County, in Shawnee County, even in Douglas and Johnson County. There were little pockets of that orange color that needed work too. And here again, if you're in the business of selling this, where are you going to go first? If there are customers to be had in the Kansas City area without some incentive to come out to Western Kansas, real Western Kansas, it's hard to make that decision to go to Western Kansas, not stay in the big metropolitan areas.
Yeah, understandable, absolutely. We have Nick back on the phone from Victoria. Nick, your question this evening of the legislators?
Yeah, I appreciate you guys taking my call. You guys were talking about the decrease in population in Kansas, and I was wondering, other than broadband, what other policies you think could help retain like the young people in this place, let alone adding people from other communities. Because the statistics I've seen show a lot of the young people leave Kansas, particularly the rural parts. And so I'm wondering what you can do about that. And also, what is the status of that large expenditure for this development that you guys did at the beginning of the year, and the bill for that? So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. I'll tackle the first one first. The reality that we have to understand, and we tend to want to be Pollyanna about this, kids just aren't coming back to the farm like they used to. And I know Ken can speak to this a lot better than I can, but this isn't the 1950s and 60s anymore, where you'd go off to university and learn some new techniques and then come back and take over the family farm. It isn't happening anymore. It just isn't. And I know there are people who have had, you know, they want to try to make that happen, but I don't think that that's going to happen. Now, of course, like I say, broadband's at the top of the list, but also tax policy. We have got to get more competitive with our surrounding states with our tax policy. We just do. Now, you want to tackle Apex, or?
I can do that.
Explain that to us, but remind us what it is again, Ken.
Okay. What happened really as the session started, the governor and the commerce secretary, who was the lieutenant governor, said, we're in the running for this super secret, possibly bringing in thousands of jobs and ancillary jobs.
$4 billion project,
right.
Not company,
well,
a $4 billion project.
Right. And so named Apex, and so it was passed by both houses with some incentives based on training, based on jobs, based on a number of different factors. I mean, we don't have that much time to go through them all. So the status of it right now is still waiting.
On them.
On them.
Okay.
We thought maybe the end of February. Now it looks like maybe the end of March, probably sometime in April. What we understand is it's kind of between Kansas and Oklahoma. What it is, we don't really know, but a lot of things seemingly that it might be a battery plant to support electric vehicles.
Batteries and microchips.
So, so which could mean some of those places here in western Kansas that have those type of facilities. So, you know, we don't know for sure where it is. I think we all can assume it's going to be in the eastern side of the state, just because where the population is. A situation like this has bussed people in to work before, because one of our big challenges all over is housing. It's housing. Where are people going to live? Now, I'd like to address maybe what Clarke said as well. Maybe I guess I'm one of those Pollyanna people. There's a lot of good communities that are doing a lot of good things. We know there's growth in Rahjes. But the communities that I represent aren't giving up. And they do small businesses, they do small manufacturing. It may not be a home run of 1,500 jobs, 400,000, you know, how many jobs, but it may be the 10s and 12s. Mm-hmm. And trying to find, again, it goes back to that quality of life. Agriculture obviously has changed. You know, at one time our farm supported 5 families. Now it's down to a couple. And so just because of technology has changed. But there is also a lot of technology that's come to western Kansas. I think a lot of times we as humble folks, humble Kansans, don't like to brag about the good things that are going on. And our kids still are getting a good education in our public schools. But it is. I mean, I think one thing I will agree with Representative Sanders is there are some realities we have to look at. Students that go off to college or tech school, and what are we doing to encourage them to come home? I think that's a big question as well. If kids come back, how will they be treated? Will they be treated as, oh, well, that's old Johnny who grew up here, or is that John who now is a master plumber or a welder that makes pretty good money, and then takes them to be, you know, a more than just a taxpayer in the community, but really a vital part. And that's the thing where a lot of groups are trying to find. And again, it goes back to, we kind of jokingly say the best and brightest of Western Kansas go to Johnson County. We see them come back home. And sometimes they do. When my kids were little, we did. We left the farm in 1999 to go to Topeka, and then we went to Tonganoxie, but then came back home, came back close to home and in a small community, because my wife and I grew up in small communities, and we want our kids to have that same deal. And maybe that's what we have to, you know, continue to talk good about our communities.
Not be quite so humble and promote it.
And I think so, because I think as you look, pretty much everything you can find. I mean, yeah, there's going to be things we can't find. I can remember I was on a panel once with the Johnson County Legislature, and she was talking about all the construction and how sometimes it's hard to sleep. And I said, well, you know, when I come home at night, I can get out of my car and I look up and I see millions of stars. And if I'm lucky, I might hear a hoot owl. Or I'm a mile off the highway, I may hear a truck. But I can live in plain sight, you know, almost hide in plain sight, and have that quality of life. I don't have 14 different movie screens to go find a movie. The idea is, are you going to go to the movie? Period. You know, which is fine. And we choose that, and we have a great quality of life here. So, you know.
And I didn't mean
No, I know.
to be insulting. As I'm sitting listening to you talk, we're all familiar with the phrase, "The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence." So we think about people who leave Western Kansas and go somewhere else because the grass is always greener. But then there'll be people who are not in Western Kansas now who will desire that lifestyle that Ken's talking about here. And for them, the other side of the fence is Western Kansas.
Right.
And maybe, you know, some of the folks who leave Western Kansas and then return like your family did, don't realize how good they had it in the first place.
I think that's one thing that has come up in discussions in Ellis County is, I don't think it's unusual for young people to want to leave their hometowns and go explore the wider world, but they do that, they get to an age where maybe they're thinking about starting a family especially, and think, you know, I want the things that a smaller rural community offers or doesn't have in some ways, and that's one of the areas that the Ellis County region, Northwest Kansas, is concentrating on, is to, you know, you're an adult, you bring skills back to your hometown and be a contributing member, and there are programs that are available, all kinds. The Rahjes is one that comes to mind for much of the area. Programs that are offered by the state and even at the federal level to encourage people to come back. So I think a lot of it does come down to what you said, Ken. You know, we need to shout that out to the rest.
And sometimes I get on my little rah-rah speech. So
No, and that's fine. Whatever is going to work,
Right.
I'm in favor of.
Right.
And I mean, we need growth, population growth in Western Kansas. And now how we achieve that, you know, we can talk about, but we definitely need to have that.
That's agreed upon. We have Max back on the line finally. Again, a reminder, that number you can call, 1-800-337-4788. Oh, and Max just flossed again. Maybe we'll get to talk to him
Maybe we need
this
cell
evening.
phone rather than broadband.
Well, yeah.
Something
Maybe we
like
need
that.
landlines.
Right.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't have gotten rid of those quite so
I still have mine.
quickly. Do you?
Oh, yes.
You have a landline?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow, good for you.
Absolutely. It's multi-generational. That number's been in our family for a long time.
Oh,
Well, you know,
yeah.
you can transfer that number to a cell phone. That's what we did.
Oh, that's a good idea.
It's a good idea.
There
but
you go.
Still,
There
when
you
the
go.
electricity's off, guess what? I can
Exactly.
call and say, hey. So
And that's one of those
Yes.
things that, you know, you think about, especially in a rural area, and
Right.
we know that Kansas has crazy weather sometimes, this week being a perfect
Mm-hmm.
example. So anyway, one of the things I did want to talk to you about, that I was doing a little bit of research of activity that occurred in the legislature this week, and hearings in this within a Senate committee anyway, that has people's attention about the possibility of legalizing medical marijuana. It's been discussed before. It seems like it's gotten a little bit further this time. people are interested in it, but the committee anyway, the people who are supporting it and the people who are opposing it, they really want to make sure it's strictly regulated, Ken. And that brings me to whatever happened to our hemp harvest and hemp industry. And are we still trying to grow hemp?
Absolutely. We are. The hemp is now been commercialized, and we're industrial hemp now.
Right.
The research part of it's over, and it's maybe a little quieter maybe than some had hoped, but still working through what the Farm Bill provided, and we don't have that many processors in the state, really just a couple. And so,
do we need more?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, we do, but that's a continued process. So that's one situation. Medical marijuana passed in the House. We're getting late in the session. I don't know what will happen to it. I know some are really wanting it to finally happen. Strict regulation is going to have to be the key. It's still a class 1, so for pharmacists may not want to get involved, and so it's going to be a fine line to get it done. I know some people say, well, just legalize all of it, and then that'll take care of all our problems for everything. Well, look beyond. Look at Colorado. Look a little deeper than just all the money they made. Let's talk about quality of life. Let's talk about a lot of other things, and so that's when I'm looking at the bigger picture and the broader picture.
Look at the strain on social services.
But as far as medical marijuana, is one that I maybe have come around to. But as I've talked to the chairman, I mean, it's got to be a good bill. You can't try to shove a bunch of things to try to do a bunch of workarounds. Then it's going to be hard to support it. I understand that the folks that are suffering, folks that need it for pain, to tolerate some pain, and I feel for them. That's not. I mean, the concern is the ones that are trying to skirt the law.
And it passed last year at the 11th hour in the House and never was taken up by the Senate. Now it's being worked over on the Senate side, and if we get it, I mean, we passed it I think it may have been about the last thing we did last session, very close. And I think if it comes over, we'll have as we like to say, robust debate and see where it goes. But I could certainly support medical marijuana as long as it's under the care of a physician. And of course, one of the big things is, marijuana, medicinal or recreational, is still illegal federally.
Right.
We've never gotten that taken care of, even though it's quote unquote legal in all these other states. Technically, it's not legal anywhere in the United States because of the federal statutes. But clearly there are benefits. I think of the cancer patients who get a lot of nausea from chemo, and apparently for some people at any rate, it really works well to help with that with little or no ill side effects.
But as you noted, they're in Colorado and perhaps other states, kind of a trade-off. Yes, they've gotten a lot of money coming in, which has to be cash apparently, which is another, I find that very interesting how that has to be transacted. But as you said, the social ills and other problems that have come along with it.
The whole thing is really a federal issue. Congress needs to take care of it. And that's one thing we continue to find in this session as well. We're doing a lot of things that the federal government should take care of, that Congress should handle. And so people are getting impatient, and so states are taking it upon themselves. Good things, bad things. And so things that should, broadband, other things that should be things that federal are taking care of, states like Kansas and others are saying, well, we will handle it, we will get it started. And sometimes that could be a sticky wicket when states are trying to do with federal issues rather than kind of working it all through the process.
We are going to go back to the telephones now. I think we finally have Max from Mound Ridge on the line with us. Max, your question this evening of the legislators.
Yes, it was on sales tax.
Max, I'm sorry, I think we're still having trouble with your line. I caught sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll
Okay,
let
it
you
was
try
sale-
again. Oh, go
It was
ahead.
sales tax on out-of-state purchases.
Sales tax on out-of-state purchases, well,
Yeah.
you pay sales tax at the point of purchase. Now, if it's something on the internet, that's
Right.
now a different story.
Right.
But if you go into a brick and mortar establishment in Oklahoma or Colorado or wherever, and you purchase something, you pay sales tax right there. So if you go and buy a car in Missouri, you pay Missouri sales tax.
You were talking about, Ken, some things that Kansas and some other states are moving ahead with discussing because people are impatient with Congress not taking action on things. What else are you doing in the Kansas legislature that is directly affected by what the feds are or are not doing?
Well, I don't, we're trying not to try to, as Senator Moran says, I try to get in their way so I don't get into my way. As far as just a lot of, different situations when it comes to, elections. A lot of other states are trying to do into that. I mean, those type of things are discussing ramifications of COVID and some of those things that maybe didn't get done on the federal or didn't give us enough clarity. And a lot of that goes back to states' rights. And so where is the definition? I really think over the last couple of years, a lot of those things have become kind of foggy. There's some folks that want to do a lot of different things from a state-based level that would have greater implications though on the federal. And so again, if those don't happen, then the state says, well, we're going to do it and try. And then I'm probably one that is a little more cautious because I don't want to pay the litigation fees, because that's part of the problem, Becky, we have right now is everything you do is being litigated. We're going to talk about redistricting. I know we have a few minutes left, but we've heard our maps, whether they're perfect or not, will probably go ahead and be litigated. We know the one is for the congressional maps, and maybe our state and our state house, state senate maps. It's because that's the world we live in, and that's a poor way to govern. It's a poor way to run our lives. Is we're so focused on how a judicial mark would decide how we live our lives.
I want to talk about the redistricting process for a minute. One of the things that I was super critical of the legislature back in 2012 is the legislature didn't get it done relative to maps. The maps ended up being drawn by the courts.
Yes.
It is in our Kansas Constitution that the legislature is supposed to draw the maps. So here's what happened, and everything, and I'm talking about the federal maps now, was absolutely predictable from the word go. So we were going to pass a map, federal map in the House and the Senate, showing where District 1, the big first district, was going to be 2, 3, and 4. We were going to pass a map out of the House and out of the Senate. The governor was going to veto that map. We were going to override that veto because we've got the majorities, the 2/3 majorities necessary in both the House and the Senate. Then it was going to go to court. I'm telling you, from the word go, we knew that was going to happen. And everything in that chain has happened. So now it's in the courts. And why we're not getting some resolution to this, I don't know. But here we sit past the middle of March, and this has to get done. Our deadline for filing for office, whether it be a federal office or a state office or a local office, is noon on June 1st. I mean, the clock is ticking.
That's not that far away.
No, it's not that far away at all. As we sit here tonight and talk, it's about not even 2.5 months. And so, and the holdup is in the courts. And supposedly it's being expedited. Well, if this is expedited, I'd hate to see what unexpedited looks like, because this is ridiculous. Now we've got the same issue. we've got a Senate map drawn, we've got a House map drawn. On the House side, we haven't taken up either one of those maps, and so we're going to have to take those up, and I think we're going to do it, next week, and we'll pass them, and the Senate will pass them, and hopefully the governor won't veto them. She'll sign it into law, and then we can skip the court phase. But if she vetoes it, we'll override the veto. We've got the numbers. We will override any veto. And then it's going to be a decision of whether or not they decide to take us to court. And by the time all that can happen, we may run into the same thing that we had back in 2012, where literally on, I think the filing deadline, I think June 1st that year, and may have been June 10th was the deadline back then, was like a Tuesday. Sunday afternoon, people were planning on running for legislative seats, and all of a sudden, come to find out they didn't even live in the district that they wanted to file for. And there was a massive amount of people that showed up at the Secretary of State's office, literally at the 59th minute of the 11th hour, filing to run for state office. That's not the way life should work.
Gentlemen, I thank you so much for your time this evening. We have been visiting about the goings-on of the Kansas Legislature in Topeka with Representative Clarke Sanders from Salina with the 69th District, and also with Representative Rahjes from Agra with the 110th District. We thank you both very much for your service to us and for your time. It's been very nice. Thank you so much for spending the evening with us. We will look forward to seeing you in another week right here on Smoky Hills Public Television with the Kansas Legislature. I'm Becky Kiser.
In our increasingly electrified society, that's where a resilient grid matters most. ITC Great Plains is ensuring the greater grid can meet our energy needs now and long into the future. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.